I haven't had to pull one of these new engine designs apart yet, I don't think. I think this is my first one. Oh, oh. Hello guys, and welcome back to the shop. Today I'm working on a STIHL FS 91 line trimmer. Now, a customer brought this unit in stating that it died on him while he was using it. I did look at this thing very briefly just to try to determine if it was something simple, but I do believe we have a major engine problem with this unit. So I figured this would be a great opportunity to go ahead and just tear this thing down with you guys and see what we find. We'll also determine if it's something I can fix or if it's a warranty issue, that type of thing. I'll also do a very brief general overview of these units. This won't be one of my typical common problems video, but I'll just go ahead and point some things out to look for as I tear this thing apart. Okay, so just a quick comparison. These two here happen to be the FS91 here, and then this one is the older design. This happens to be an HL100, which is an extended hedge trimmer. Now, as far as the engine is concerned, that's my main thing here with this comparison. As you can see the difference between the two designs. This is the older design, which would be in this case like the HL100, the FS90, those types of units. Now these things were around for many years and you'll still see a ton of these things out there. And then this is the new design right here, which is just a little bit different. Now basically nothing interchanges in between the two units. The engine covers are completely different. The air filters are completely different. Recoils, it's an entirely new design, if you will. Now on the front side here you can see the difference. The fan housings and the clutch housings are completely different. The carburetors are completely different. And again, the engine housings and how they're put together is different. So if you do see these things out in the field or whatever, if you find a used one, just so you know what you're looking at, I'll just point this out. This is the older design, and then that's the new design. And this is what you're going to typically see pretty much across the board anymore, whether it's an extended pole saw, line trimmer, hedge trimmer, anything like that. This is pretty much what you're going to find. When I get a piece of equipment like this on the bench and it just says it died in use, basically I'm just going to look at it real quick to try to determine if it's something simple. The most obvious would be fuel. So I'm just going to check the gas just to make sure that it actually has gas in it. Yes, it does. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull on the recoil and I'm going to go see how it feels. Now in this case, it's completely locked up. So that tells me instantly we've got a problem. Now it's not uncommon. It could be something simple. I have seen in some cases where there is debris caught in the flywheel in the fan housing. I've seen rocks piled into the flywheel. You know, if a landscape truck, say they have a load of gravel on the back of their truck or whatever, they just throw the equipment in the back of the truck. It's not uncommon to get rocks inside the fan housings of these things and cause it to get stuck between the flywheel and the coil. So that is definitely something I'm going to look for. But in this case, like I stated earlier, I did kind of do a quick overview of this thing just to try to determine if it was something simple, and I think it's something major. All right, so all I did was just take the shaft off of it. There's two screws on the throttle handle here. You just loosen them up and you slide all this stuff right off of the shaft. Just makes it a lot easier to work on. So now what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and check this thing over. I'm going to pull the air filter cover off. I'm going to pull this top cover off of the engine. This covers the rocker arm assembly, so I'm going to check that. First thing I'll do is I'll just inspect the air filter too. And the air filter looks fine. I don't see anything strange with it. Take the upper cover off. Now, once you take that upper cover off, you can see the rocker arm cover and your spark plug access, which is kind of nice about the newer designs. You don't have to take the engine cover completely off to look at all of this stuff now, which makes it a little simpler for maintenance anyway. Now, again, this thing is locked up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to pull this spark plug out. Now, as far as it being locked up, there could be a couple things, like I stated before, if you have any debris in the flywheel caught between the coil and the flywheel, or if the carburetor is leaking and it's flooding, it'll actually fill the cylinder up with fuel and it'll cause a hydrolock situation. But in this case, a lot of times when that happens, you will also see fuel coming out of the exhaust port. And in this case, I don't see any leaking of the carburetor whatsoever. Typically, if a carburetor starts flooding and it locks the engine up, you will see some fuel leaking either out of the exhaust, or when you take the air filter off, you'll see some fuel in the intake area. So that's something to be aware of. Okay, I see one issue here. I'm going to pull the rocker arm cover off as well. All right, now that I got the rocker arm cover off, I don't see anything major in here. I'll bring you in closer and I'll show you what we're looking at. All right, so just on quick inspection here, the first thing that I did find is the spark plug here. And let me try to get that where you can see it. You'll notice that gap is closed. Now if you see that in a piece of equipment, generally that's usually not good. That means the piston probably hit the spark plug for some reason or another. I have seen carbon build up before and cause that as well, but typically that is usually can point to something major. Now otherwise, inside here, one thing you want to look for is you just want to look around in here underneath the rocker arm cover and see if you see any type of debris. If there's a cam issue, that type of thing, you'll see little bits of plastic or metal, any of that type of thing up here. You just want to look around up here to see if there's anything major sitting around up here. It's not uncommon to find red silicone. That is what they use to seal the engine pans on these things and the timing covers. So don't be alarmed if you see that. Go ahead and remove it, but it's not something that's abnormal. So let's finish taking this thing apart. All right, I got you zoomed in a little bit closer here. I'm sure you'd rather see this than me, so I'm going to take this engine cover off. You got one screw in the back, and then you have two in the front. And then you just lift up on that cover and it pops right off. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at this thing again, see if I see anything major in here. Everything underneath the valve train looks fine. I don't see any issues. Carburetor, everything's operating and functioning normally here. This thing is not that old. This unit's only maybe about a year old or less. All right, let me bring you closer and I'll kind of discuss a couple of the things that I normally find with these units. So here it is with the engine cover off. Now I'll just do a quick overview of this thing as far as some of the problems that we find with these. Now overall, these units have been very solid. They're very reliable. They're a little bit heavy, but they make a lot of good power, lots of torque, and a lot of guys really like these things, especially for line trimmers and extended pole saws, that type of thing. When they really want the power, they like these units. Now they did have a lot of problems. Well, maybe not a lot of problems. They did have a few problems in the very early years, especially with camshafts. Now on the back of the camshaft, I have one here actually. This is for like a BR600, but it's basically the same cam, same design anyway. Now on the back of the camshaft, there's this metal plate, and what would happen is, and then inside of this is, there's a steel arm, and you can see that little piece right there. That is for the compression release as you turn this thing over, and it's a big heavy metal piece of metal that's inside of here with a spring. This cam plate would loosen up and fall off, and then the cam would explode, and it would basically wreak havoc on the rest of the engine and destroy it. So there was a lot of problems with these in the early years. Every once in a while I will see that problem, but not very often, not like I used to. As far as the rest of the engine is concerned, I really don't see a lot of problems with piston cylinder, that type of thing, crankshafts, bearings, overall very reliable, solid design. Now again, this is the newer design, so this has a newer carburetor on it. One thing I don't like is this new throttle design that they came up with. So you have this arm here, so the cable comes up to this arm, and then it goes down to this linkage to the carburetor, which is a solid linkage right here. And then you have the cable part up here. So as you operate this thing, you can see how it pulls it. Now, as these things start to get a lot of heavy use to them, this plastic piece will wear out. It'll get really floppy and loose and fall off and break, that type of thing. So they basically just substituted their normal plastic, you know, kind of half round design, if you will. That's pretty typical of the STIHL for this design. And it, you know, I do see a lot of wear issues in the carburetor with the solid linkage and that type of thing. The fan housings on these did have a lot of problems with the fan housings, especially with the rubber isolator bushing that's inside of here. We did replace quite a few of these under warranty because this thing would basically get super loose, especially here in Arizona when it's hot or if it's exposed to any type of chemical, that type of thing. Somebody spills gas on it, whatever. These things would really loosen up, and then the shaft inside of that bushing would just really flop around, so the engine was just bouncing around really bad on the ends of the shafts of these things. So there was an issue with that, but I do believe they have taken care of that. We don't deal with that as much anymore. Every once in a while we will see a bearing failure in the fan housing for the clutch. This is kind of typical of the STIHL, especially the FS or HL94s, those types of things. I still replace quite a few of those. Coils on these have been very reliable. I don't see really many issues with these. One other thing with the engine design, especially on the older ones, one thing you want to be aware of is these valve spring keepers. I have seen these valve spring keepers break in half or break out completely, and the valve will drop, and then that'll basically destroy the engine. Now there's no real, rhyme or reason as to why or when they fail. They just fail. Typically it's on units that have quite a bit of hours on them and heavy use. That's when I usually will see it, not very often on something newer. But keep that in mind. You want to keep an eye on these things, because I have seen them come in and half of this valve keeper was gone. But the thing was still running just fine, so I ended up just replacing the valve spring retainer, or the retainer, I guess you should say. So you might want to keep an eye on those and make sure they're not broken. Other than that, as far as major issues, I really don't see a whole lot of major issues with these. Every once in a while, yeah, you got to do a typical carburetor. That's normal. The recoils on these are pretty strong. The gas tanks are really good, and the rest of the housings on these things are very strong, and they hold up really well. So let's go ahead and get into the rest of this thing and start tearing this apart. Okay, and as I stated earlier, this thing is locked up. Now, the recoil is locked up, but if I reach in here, I can kind of turn the flywheel, and the flywheel does turn. But you can hear that clunking noise. And I got a rocker arm. I got some rocker arm movement here, but my piston is not moving in the cylinder. So that is not a good thing. So I'm going to take this fan housing the rest of the way off. Just one screw. Let's get that out of the way. You can hear it there. So if I just put a screwdriver in here and I'm right on the piston, see the rocker arm moving. So we have something major going on in there. So let me just go ahead and start disassembling this thing. Next I'll take the recoil off. All right, next I'm going to take this carburetor off. I just like to get a screwdriver and just kind of get in behind it and pop it off of there. Now I'm going to take this whole fuel system off because this thing's going to get pulled apart. So I'll just leave the fuel lines attached. Now, one thing interesting that I do see here, as I stated earlier about the red silicone, is, see that right there, that piece of silicone? That is your pulse tube to the bottom end, which sends a signal to the carburetor pulse, the fuel pump. But that little piece of silicone was stuck inside of there. Now, it's not something that's really going to affect anything, but something to be aware of with the silicone on these things. I usually find quite a bit of it. All right, next I'm just going to take the muffler off. There's 3 bolts on the muffler. So there's nothing in the flywheel. I don't see anything. So we've definitely got a major engine issue here. And then what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and pull the cam cover off. This is the cam cover. You have 4 bolts. And then you'll need a screwdriver just to kind of get up under it, pop it off of there. Just slowly work it up. Then you'll have the pins that are in there that actually locate the cam. Now I don't see anything major in here. Everything looks pretty good. The cam looks okay. Now the clutches on these things, I haven't had really any major issues with these clutches. I have heard of other people complaining about them wearing out or blowing apart. Every once in a while we'll get one with the spring that's broken. But overall, these clutches for us now have held up really well. Now I'm in the Phoenix area, and I definitely think it's one of those things that we don't use line trimmers probably as much as a lot of the other parts of the country do. Typically it's pretty seasonal for us because we don't have a lot of heavy grass that grows year round here. Now typically during monsoon season we will experience quite a bit of grass buildup and growth, so they will get used extra hard during monsoon season, but otherwise throughout the year here it's typically just normal maintenance, trimming, light trimming, that type of thing. Because I know in other parts of the country, these things are used very heavily when it comes to the weed eater end of it. But here in the valley, we just don't see that. And pull this engine pan off. Trying to keep my tools out of the camera view here. Only 4 bolts. You could try to pop it off by hand. Typically you're going to need a little hammer just to tap it. I forgot to pull the wiring off. Let me disconnect the wires. I forgot about that. I haven't had to pull one of these new engine designs apart yet, I don't think. I think this is my first one. Oh. Okay. Well, I do believe we found the issue. Wow. I would say that's a broken rod. Well, a broken piston anyway, I should say. Pull the crankshaft out of here. You can see the debris in the engine pan, which is never good. Yeah, the rod is wedged into the crankshaft right there. I have never seen that on a STIHL before. That's a new one for me. See it there. I don't know if I can get that loose or not. This thing is locked up. Now, you can see the piston inside of there. See, the piston is broken in there. It looks like it just broke where the wrist pin went in. Wow, I've never seen that before. Not like that anyway. I mean, I've seen it on, wrist pin failures are common on STIHL, of course, BR600s like I've talked about. BR700s on my videos before, because there is no bearing in the wrist pin on those things. And it has a bushing, but it still spins freely. I can spin the wrist pin. Comes in and out, no problem. So that is interesting. It looks like just the piston broke. And there's the piston. You can see the piston there. Just broke that right off. Very interesting. Here's the rest of it. Here's another view of the crankshaft there. So that's quite interesting. Now, I don't see anything that would have caused that. So my only guess would be maybe the piston here is just too thin. I have no idea. For whatever reason, it came apart. here's the other piece of the piston. You can see the keeper and the pan there and the rest of the debris. The cylinder and everything looks great. I don't see any issues with the cylinder. Yeah, the cylinder looks great. The valves look fine. They don't look bent. I mean, this thing doesn't have any hours on it. And the cam looked really good. I don't see any issues with the camshaft either. All right, guys, well, that's a new one for me. I've never seen quite that extensive damage before on one of these things, especially a piston break like that and then bend the rods. So typically the connecting rods and the crankshaft and all these things, they hold up with STIHL products. They generally hold up really well. Again, with the BR600, 700, some of the backpack blowers, yes, I've had issues with the wrist pins failing. But typically that is just because the bushing and the wrist pin and the bushing seizes up because they don't run a bearing. But in this case, this thing I can pull the wrist pin out and it works. Everything still functions properly. So I guess maybe just the piston just broke. Man, this thing, it is light duty. It does feel really light. So maybe it's just not thick enough. I don't know. I haven't heard of any major issues with these things as far as this is concerned anywhere else in the nation. But I don't know, if you see any of this type of stuff, let me know. This is a first for me. I'm going to try to bang this rod out. There we go. So yeah, you can see the connecting rod completely shifted off of the bearing. And she's bent good. She's junk. So anyway, next step for this thing will be just to submit this for warranty. Again, this unit is not very old, and I really don't see why it wouldn't be a warranty issue. So I will do the paperwork on this thing, get it submitted, and in this case, I'm not sure what they'll do. They may just replace the unit. I do believe I can just throw a crankshaft in this thing and a piston kit and send it down the road. So that's the next step for this thing, is I'll go ahead and get it submitted and see what STIHL says, send them some pictures, that type of thing. Find out if there's any other issues with these things around the country, if anybody else is experiencing anything. If you experienced anything like this before, especially a connecting rod or a piston failure and a connecting rod being bent, let me know. Everyone, again, other equipment, yeah, I have seen it, but typically not on these engines here. So I appreciate you watching. If you don't mind, like and subscribe. And I'll go ahead and I'll try to do more of these in the future as far as destruction videos or whatnot. Every once in a while I run into something that's pretty cool to check out, so I'll try to film those when I can. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.